Hello there. Thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's story explores the hidden corners of the human psyche, gentle yet profound. Stay tuned, and don't forget to support the channel so you won't miss the next stories. I don't even know how to say this, but I think I've ruined my marriage by agreeing to something I knew I couldn't handle. Okay, so, let me start from the beginning. My husband Tony is the most handsome, charming, and confident man I've ever met. When we started dating, I couldn't believe someone like him would even give me a second glance. I've always been, the plain one. I've never been the girl who turns heads, but he made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the room. We got married after 2 years of dating, and honestly, it felt like I had won the lottery. Every day I reminded myself how lucky I was to be with someone like him. He always had women flirting with him, but he would brush it off and say, "Why would I need anyone else when I have you?" It made me feel special, even though deep down I knew he was the catch in our relationship. But about a year ago, he started joking about the idea of an open marriage. At first, I thought it was just that, a joke. He'd say things like, "Imagine if we both had the freedom to explore without it meaning anything." I would laugh it off, but it started coming up more often. Then one night, after a few drinks, he sat me down and said, "Look, I love you, but I think this could be good. For us, it could add some excitement, and it would be completely consensual." I felt my stomach drop. Every fiber of my being was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to risk making him feel trapped or unhappy. And let's be real, I'm not exactly a prize compared to him. I kept telling myself, he married you. He loves you. He's still here, isn't he? So I said yes. At first, nothing happened. It was just this agreement, sitting there like a ticking time bomb. Then, a few weeks later, he started going out more. He'd come home late, smelling like perfume, but he'd act like everything was fine. He'd tell me about the women he'd met, how they'd been waiting for him to finally be available. It crushed me. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me. I'd sit at home, scrolling through photos of us, convincing myself that this was just a phase. But every time he walked out the door, it felt like a piece of me went with him. I couldn't bring myself to do the same. The thought of being with someone else made me feel sick. I love him too much to even look at another man. But for him, it was like opening a door he'd been dying to walk through. One night he came home and casually mentioned how one of the women he was seeing wanted to meet up again. He laughed, like it was some funny story. But I could feel my chest tightening. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him how much it was hurting me, how I felt like I wasn't enough for him. And do you know what he said? He told me, "You're the one I come home to. Isn't that what matters?" I don't even know how to explain how that felt, like I was just a placeholder. Like being his wife wasn't enough anymore. Now I'm stuck. I love him, but I hate what this is doing to me. I've never felt so small, so invisible. The days started blending together after that. He'd leave for work, sometimes come home late, and other times not at all. I didn't ask questions anymore. I couldn't handle the answers. But it wasn't just the late nights or the other women. It was everything. Like how he always changed the subject whenever I brought up starting a family. When we got married, we talked about kids. I remember how excited I was back then. He said he wanted them too, just not right away. I told myself that was fine. We were young. We had time. But then a year passed, and then another. And every time I brought it up, he had an excuse. Work was too busy. Finances weren't where they should be. "Let's just enjoy us for a little longer," he'd say. I believed him. I thought it was just a timing thing. But now, looking back, it's like all the pieces are clicking into place. What if he never actually wanted a family with me? What if this whole time, He's just been stringing me along, waiting for something or someone better to come along. It hit me like a freight train one night when I was folding laundry. He'd left one of his shirts on the bed, and as I picked it up, I caught the faintest hint of perfume that wasn't mine. For a second, I just stood there, clutching that stupid shirt, and all I could think about was how I'd been fooling myself this whole time. I gave up so much for him. I bent over backward to make him happy, to be the perfect wife, to prove that I was enough for someone like him. And what did I get in return? A husband who would rather spend his nights with strangers than with me. A man who made me believe we had a future together, only to keep moving the finish line every time I got close. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor and just cried. I cried for the family I'd never have, for the love I thought we shared, for the person I used to be before I let this relationship consume me. And the worst part is, even now, I can't bring myself to hate him. I love him so much it hurts. I love him enough to break myself just to keep him happy, even if it means losing every piece of myself in the process. But I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending this is enough. A few weeks ago, I decided to ask him about the baby thing one last time. We were having dinner, just the two of us, for a change, and I tried to keep it light. I brought up how we used to talk about having kids, and how I'd always pictured us with a little boy who had his eyes. He didn't even look up from his plate. I told you, now isn't the right time, he said. I asked him when it would be. I don't know, he snapped, like the question annoyed him. Can we not do this right now? That was the first time he'd raised his voice at me in months. Normally, he didn't get angry, he just dismissed me, or twisted the conversation to make it about me somehow. But that night, the anger felt real. I didn't press the issue. I just nodded, finished my meal, and helped clean up. But later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while he scrolled on his phone beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the way he snapped, but the way he immediately shut the door on the idea. It made me think about all the other things he'd shut down over the years. How he always seemed to have one foot out the door, like he was keeping his options open. How he was so quick to bring other women into our lives, but never seemed to want to build a life with me. And the more I thought about it, the more it all started to make sense. What if he never really wanted me? What if I was just convenient, the safe choice, until he found someone better? I haven't brought up kids since. What's the point? He doesn't want them. Not with me, anyway. And every day it feels like he's drifting further away. Like I'm watching him slip through my fingers and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Last weekend, he told me he was going on a guy trip with some old friends. I didn't ask where they were going or when he'd be back. I just smiled and told him to have fun. And that's when it hit me. This isn't a marriage anymore. It's not even a partnership. It's just me sitting here, waiting for him to come back, while he's out living his life like I don't even exist. I don't know how much more of this I can take. The day he left for his guy trip, I decided to clean the house, mostly to distract myself. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, even tackled the closet in our bedroom. That's when I found it. The overnight bag wasn't packed for a weekend with friends. It was packed for something else entirely. Fancy clothes, cologne, and a box of condoms tucked neatly at the bottom of the bag. I just stood there staring at it, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands were shaking, and for a moment I thought I might throw up. I didn't confront him. I couldn't. What was I supposed to say? That I'd been snooping? That I'd found proof of what I already knew deep down? Instead, I put everything back exactly the way I found it and went about my day like nothing had happened. But when he called me later that night, acting like everything was normal, something inside me snapped. He was laughing, telling me some hilarious story from his trip, and I could hear music and voices in the background. Definitely not the sound of a quiet cabin with friends. "Two," I interrupted, my voice shaky. Are you happy? There was a pause. What kind of question is that? He asked, his tone light, almost mocking, like I'd just asked if he wanted fries with his meal. I'm serious, I said. Are you happy with me? Another pause, longer this time. You're overthinking again, he finally said. We'll talk when I get back, okay? And just like that, the call ended. The next morning, I woke up to a text from a mutual friend. It was a photo of Tony smiling with his arm around another woman, her head leaning against his shoulder like they'd been together for years. The caption read, "Saw Tony last night. Didn't know you guys were in town." I couldn't even cry. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like my entire world had crumbled in an instant. When he came home 2 days later, he walked in like nothing had happened. He kissed me on the cheek, dropped his bag by the door, and asked what was for dinner. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. Who was she? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He froze, hands still on the zipper of his jacket. What are you talking about? The woman in the photo, I said, holding up my phone. His face went blank, and for the first time in years he looked genuinely caught off guard. But then just like that his expression softened, and he laughed. Actually laughed. Come on, he said, shaking his head. She's just a friend. You're really going to get worked up over something so stupid. And that's when I realized it. This wasn't about me being naive or desperate anymore. It was about him knowing he could do whatever he wanted because I'd never leave. Because I loved him too much. Because I was too afraid to admit that the man I'd built my entire life around didn't actually care about me. I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe I'll finally find the strength to leave. Or maybe I'll keep pretending everything's fine, because the thought of starting over is too terrifying. But one thing's for sure. I can't keep living like this. For days, I walked around in a fog, barely eating, barely sleeping. Tony, of course, acted like nothing had happened. He'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, text me casually during the day, and come home late like clockwork. But every time I saw him, all I could think about was that photo and the bag I'd unpacked filled with everything he needed for someone else. Then one night, I caught myself staring at our wedding photo on the mantel. I looked at the girl in the white dress, smiling like she'd just won the world, and I barely recognized her. She had no idea what was coming. No clue how much of herself she'd give away for a man who didn't deserve it. That was the moment I decided. The next morning, after Tom left for work, I called the lawyer. When I finally told him I was leaving, he laughed again like it was some kind of joke. Come on, Ashley, he said. You're not going anywhere. You wouldn't know what to do without me. That hurt more than anything else he'd ever said. But for once, I didn't cry. I just handed him the papers and told him I wasn't asking for permission. His face changed then. He didn't try to win me back. He didn't apologize. He just went cold like I was suddenly a stranger to him. Fine, he said, tossing the papers onto the counter. But don't think you're getting anything out of this. You've lived off me long enough. The divorce was quick, thankfully. There was no prenup, but even walking away with half of everything didn't feel like a win. The money didn't matter. I would have given it all back if it meant I could have the man I thought I married. Moving out of our house was the hardest part. Packing up my life into boxes. Deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. It felt like erasing the last 10 years. I cried the entire drive to my new apartment, a small one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For weeks I felt like a ghost. I'd sit on the couch, staring at my phone, half expecting him to call and beg me to come back. But the calls never came. Instead, I'd see photos of him on social media, smiling with new women, looking happier than I'd ever seen him with me. It was like he didn't even notice I was gone. I won't lie, there were nights I regretted leaving. Nights when the loneliness felt unbearable and I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But then I'd remember all the times I begged him to see me, to love me the way I loved him, and how he never even tried. I started small, forcing myself to go outside for walks, to explore the city, to remember what life felt like before I became his shadow. I joined a book club, started going to a local coffee shop every morning. Then slowly I started meeting people. I'm not ready to date, not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But I'm learning how to be alone without feeling lonely. How to take care of myself in ways I never had to before. And the funny thing is, I've realized I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of letting go of the version of him I'd created in my head. Some days, I still miss him. I don't think that will ever completely go away. But I'm finally starting to see. Loving him wasn't the problem. The problem was loving someone who never truly loved me back. And for the first time in years, I'm not living for him. I'm living for me. Thank you for listening until the end. Every story holds a piece of someone's truth and maybe a piece of your own. If this touched you in any way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. See you in the next video.